Hello and welcome to week 11's presentation. Our topic today is going to be on cost management graphics. The use of graphics to help us to communicate information regarding the cost performance of a project. Also in our reading assignments chapter 13, starting on page 661 of Kurtzner, note that we do not have a case study this week. Rather, there are three problems, 13.1, 13.2, and 13.3, which are the assignment for this week. In looking at a series of graphics this week, we're going to note and be reminded of the kind of information that a graphic can communicate. When we use a graphic, the eyes are actually doing the analysis for us, and they're taking in a great amount of information directly to the brain, and we're processing it all almost at the same time, and it communicates a lot more information and more significant messages. For instance, this chart right here is demonstrating the 5 processes or phases of the life cycle of a project, and the most significant message that comes out of this chart is that they are not discrete, starting and stopping and passing on from one to another. But actually, if you look at the initiating process, it is the earliest one to start, but then planning starts before it is even significantly half done. And the planning process goes on for quite a while, almost through to the end of the project. The executing process starts almost as the planning process starts. And that's normally the case. Once we start doing the planning, we actually, in many cases, actually initiate certain tasks or actually start on the project, staffing it up, getting things ready, getting people involved, at least coming up with a core staff to assist us in the planning process. Since we're doing that, we're in the planning process and we're starting some execution, some actual tasks, we need to have some controlling processes going on, some monitoring and control, because we are spending money, we're spending time, the clock is running, we're heading towards the goal line, we're heading towards the finish. As we do each one of these phases, and one phase may be predominant at any given time, as you can see from the peaks of these phases, you will note that there's a lot of overlap and continuity between the phases. And the closing processes, our closeout, all of that, it does not start at the very end. It starts actually before planning is finished. Why? Because as we get through the process, as we get through the project, we have to revise some of our planning for the closing processes. We have to start looking at, we're staffing down our project team, as you can see from the executing processes. They're dropping off, which means the activity is dropping off. With the activity dropping off, that means we're probably releasing people. What are we doing about that? That should be part of our closing processes. We should make sure that the individuals have a heads up when they're going to be released, that we talk to their managers. We make sure that they have work to go to or another job or another task. And we also need, as project managers, to prepare evaluations on them, to put down on the record the good performance that they attributed, what they contributed to the project, all the things that they should get recognized for. And then we go into the finish phase, which actually is probably just close out, archiving, lessons learned, all of those type things. But it also might include, your closing process and might include a handoff. If you're providing and you've developed or implemented some system or product or whatever, it may have to be handed off to either a customer or another department, and you need to get through that handoff process. Another way of looking at project life cycles and looking at various elements of it that affect us in monitoring and control and in costing and making sure that we're on our project schedule is here we're looking at it from a little different perspective. We're looking at project, if you look up the left side, definition, planning, execution, transition, closeout. Well, that's the 5. It's a little bit different, but the 5 major processes. But on the right side is an interesting item. There we have looking at the cycles as phases that we're going through, and we're looking at reviewing the major element of those phases and then approval to proceed on to what comes next. Now you might say, based on that visual, that there must be a discrete transition between execution and transition and closeout, planning and execution. It may look like that, but in fact that's not true. It may mean that the bulk of the work you're moving over, you're transitioning, where planning is not the predominant function and now execution is predominant, and we go from execution to transition. And in the meantime, we need project control throughout the entire life of the project. Taking that same visual, that graphic, and now just putting on the side those phases and putting in some major bullets of what we want to accomplish in those phases adds an incredible amount of body of information to us. If we just look at the phase 1, business case, project complexity, project prioritization, project plan, team project. Phase 2, work breakdown structure, scope, schedule, skill, resources. And then phase 3, action items, baseline management, change management. Obvious, we're in execution. And we can walk through these and we see the major substance of each of these phases. And then we can make an assessment and evaluation of how well we're transitioning and are we prepared for what comes next and what goes on as we go through the various portions and the various elements of a project's life. Changing the picture really quick, talking about economic value analysis. This is a very interesting concept to be considering when we are looking at evaluating a transaction or a relationship with a customer or another department or a vendor or whatever. When we're talking about trying to come up to total economic value, how do we really arrive at an agreement on a cost or a price or anything of that nature? Well, one of the ways to do it is take the best competing solution from the customer's point of view. And what you do is that's the reference value. What is the very best competing solution from a customer's point of view, and use that as your reference. That will be our reference. Then we do some evaluation and we look at some positive differentiation. In other words, what are the pluses? What are the additional items above that reference value that we're finding in this transaction or this relationship that we're looking at right now? And what we want to do is we have this reference, we want to add those positive differentiation values to it, and then there may be some drawbacks. We may find some negative elements to it. And when we do that and we subtract those out, when we have arrived at that end result, we call that the total economic value. We have started with a good competing solution, use that as a reference. Then we're looking at the transaction in front of us, looking at the positives, adding those in, the value of those, looking at some negatives, some things we may not like about it, subtracting that value out, and then arriving at a total economic value. And there we can have, through this rational process, determine what we believe we really want to pay or what someone should want to pay. And we do this by looking at it from the customer's perspective. Even though we may not be the customer, we may be on the other side, but by looking at it from their point of view, it helps us a great deal. Another way of looking at negotiation dynamics. If you look on the left side, you're looking at the offer, and the offer has got a price on the table. But the offeree, like the customer, they don't see it as a price. They see it as a cost. And the higher that cost, the more unhappy they are, and that's why they're red. But for the offer, the higher the price, the more they like it. The offeree wants the price to go down, or the cost to go down, and the offer wants the price to go up. So you have a preference, like looking at the middle there. There's an offerer's presence, and then there's an offeree's presence. And then the process of negotiation is moving up and down in that place until we come to a value that we believe is win-win for both sides. Both are satisfied with it. We may have made some compromises. We may have moved some things out, changed some work, done this, done that, adjusted our different prices and costs. But then we arrive at an agreed value, and then our transaction is agreed. And this is just another picture of basically what will come next. And this is during the negotiation process, while the previous slide was looking at it from what to establish a reference and establish what we believe the customer's position will be. This is the kind of graphic that you might want to use if you're looking at a business investment, if you're looking at a project where money has got to be invested, capital investment has got to be made, and what we want to do is we want to show basically where will the project break even. This demonstrates that by starting out by listing the capital investment by month, and then any market preparation, looking at the total investment, and that's the green line going down, which actually becomes red. And then we look at the when do we start to make some sales, when do we, maybe like a license, implementation revenue, we sell some licenses and then we implement it and we get some dollars there. So we're starting to generate some revenue. That's the blue line. We look at that, the combination of the licenses revenue and the implementation revenue, we call that our total revenue. And from that, we take our investment costs and we take our implementation costs and we subtract that from our revenue. And you notice that that green line, we call that the gross margin curve. And the green line is really following our investment in the beginning because there's no revenue at all. And then as we start to generate revenue, making sales, implementations, you see the green line starts to deviate from the total amount that we've spent and invested. The green line starts to follow up and track up as our revenue increases. That orange line represents the cost of our implementation, so we have to add that cost in too. So the two major costs is our implementation cost or sales cost, and the red one is the investment or the initial investment into whatever it is we've created that required the investment. But then as the revenue increases, we finally do come to a point where the revenue, the total revenue generated now equals the sum of our investment and our installation costs, our cost of sales. And that point is called the break-even point. And in this case, if this was representing some investment, what was going on, we'd say if these are months, we would say that after about 14 and 3/4 months, we break even. So for 14, almost 15 months, we're not going to break even. But at month 15, we are now positive. We are now generating cash. We're generating enough cash that we're breaking even. And every time that green line goes above that zero line means that we are actually showing profit. So this is demonstrating that from months 15 through 19, we have generated profit and we were a profitable operation. So this is the kind of curve that you might show if you have to demonstrate to management based on an investment. When will we make our money back? When will we start to have actually a profit? What will go on? So that everybody has a true and honest picture of what is happening here. Another type of break-even chart, but this is based a little bit different. It's different in the sense that it doesn't really require an investment up front. This might be like if you're going into business opening a barber shop or a store where there's no capital investment. You have some fixed costs, which are like your lease costs and like of your cases or whatever, and those costs won't change, are paying those every month. And then you have a variable cost, which is like the cost of the labor to handle as your salespersons and the people to deliver the products or deliver the goods that you're selling or whatever. And then that black slope from starting out at zero and going up is the revenues. As you go into business that first day, you still have these high fixed costs, and then you have the variable costs we just added rather than on top of the fixed costs rather than just adding it on to zero, so that we can see the sum of the fixed costs and the variable costs equals our total costs. And then we just look at the revenue, how much sales we're making, how much money's coming in, and eventually here in this case, we get to 60 days or 60 months and we finally break even. And our revenue has now equaled the sum of our fixed cost and variable cost. And from this point on, we are going to be in a profitable position. And then we continue with our sales and the revenues continue. Our profit will start to grow. It doesn't start to grow on each sale, but now our revenues coming in is greater than the sum of the fixed costs and the total costs. So we now are making a profit, and we're recovering from our losses which we had prior to the break-even point. And you can see that section, that area that's listed as loss, represents where our revenues are not sufficient to overcome the fixed costs and the variable costs. Another chart is a cost account intersection where we have our WBS looking at us right in the middle. We're at WBS level 3 and we go down to 4 and 5, and we put some work packages together, antenna, transmitter, receiver, and then we've taken the company's organization chart and laid it on the side as sort of like putting a matrix together. What we can do is we can take the various departments, and in this case we're looking at the engineering organization, the design department, and particularly the electrical design department, and we're going to assign the electrical design department to the transmitter work and all the tasks for the transmitter. And we generate that and put that into a cost account, and that has the work packages and tasks in it. The electrical design department is going to be tasked to do, which relates to the transmitter, which with the transmitter and the antenna and the receiver will make up the radar level 5. By this kind of a chart, we can see how we are interrelating our functional activities and tasks of our project with the organizational structure, and we can see what the order is. And then also there's a little picture there of a RAM, responsibility assignment matrix, and we will list on there the transmitter and the electrical group, and we will tag them as being responsible for the design of the transmitter. And so we can tie these things together, and this gives us a pictorial about that. And also, if this is a very, very large project, we may establish someone as a cost account manager, someone which will track the hours and the dollars and everything for this cost account. And this cost account is probably a job number. They'll track that, or several job numbers, and they'll track that and then report that to the project office for the final overall project analysis. This is a very interesting secret. There, I said it. It's a secret. This is called triple point sensitivity, and it's actually was published about 14 years ago now. It's called the 10% test. Any of you that actually have been served as a project manager driving a project knows that when we are looking at the triple point, the schedule, performance, features, or cost, quite often we have to look at the project and we realize that something's got to give. We cannot hit all three exactly on target. If we can't hit them all on target, the question we ask is, well, which one is the one that would have the least impact to the company? Well, I'll share another secret with you, and that is every time I've gone in and talked to anybody, a manager or a customer, a sponsor, and asked them, well, if I got to slip one or if I got to miss one, I don't want to, I'm going to work hard to make it. Which one is the one that I can slip? And they say none. I've never had anyone respond to me and identify one of them. But by using the 10% test, I can actually determine which one will have the least impact on the customer. These three charts represent the 10% test done to three different type projects. The one in the upper left is a 10% value chart for a new product development. The one to the right is for like an in-house development project, and the one at the bottom is like for a value for a government bid. And basically what the process is you sit down with your customer or key stakeholder and you ask them, if I overran the schedule, if I was late by 10%, what kind of value impact would that be to you? If I was underrun the schedule, if I brought the project in complete 10% earlier, what value would that be to you? And then I ask the same thing about the performance and quality features, and then the same thing about the cost. Then I have some answers. I didn't say which one can I miss now. What I want to determine is what is the value to the customer if I'm 10% overrun in cost or 10% underrun, if I'm 10% late or 10% early, if my functionality is off by 10% or exceeded by 10%. And I get a sense of value from the stakeholder, from the customer, and I can plot those. And you can see that for this first one, the new product development, schedule is the most sensitive. By being over or under, you have the biggest impact. The features is the next in magnitude, and cost is the least. So the cost is the one that I would say, okay, I can actually exceed the cost, okay? Or if I have to have one slip, it's cost. And then on the in-house development project, you can see that features has the greatest value over or under. It had the greatest impact or benefit. For the government, cost is the greatest impact over or under. And so I have used this 10% test, and it does get me past that point of being able to determine if something has to give on that triple point, the project manager's commitment of cost, schedule, and performance. That's the triple point. If something has to give, which one is the most important not to miss, and which one is the least important that if I have to miss something, I'll miss on that one. So I'm sharing this with you, and this gives a very good graphic and very good perception of what's going on there. This chart, the project overview statement to schedule. This is a high-level graphic showing us our planning process. It says we start out in the initiation cycle and we put together a project overview statement which has the problem or opportunity on it. It has a project goal, the objectives, success criteria, and any assumptions we're making, or high-level risks, any obstacles. And basically this will become the authorizing document to start the planning cycle and to actually start the project. It defines the goal and any objectives to be achieved on the road to the goal. Following the project overview statement, we come to constructing the work breakdown structure, the WBS. We take that goal and we start breaking it down, and we start breaking it down all the way down until we have all the tasks identified. And then for each task, we have to define that task, define what is the description of work for the task, what are the skill sets that are required, how long, what is the duration of that task, what type of people are going to be involved in it, what kind of constraints are there, what has to be supplied so the task can be performed, what are the deliverables out of the task. And then we also want to add one other very, very critical bit of information, and that is, what is the basis of estimate for this task? What are we basing our estimate on? This is the support, the substantiation, the corroboration that gives us credibility in our estimate. Is this like a task we had last year, only it's twice as hard or 3 times as hard? What was the project we did 2 months ago, and we had a task just like this, and it was just about the same as this, so we've used that. What is this based on? Is this based on an estimate from one of our subject matter experts? Maybe we've got a bid outside from 2 vendors we use as the basis for the estimate of this task. So by having this kind of information on each task, we have a very good foundation, a solid foundation to put together the best cost estimate that we can possibly come up with. Once we have the tasks and the task descriptions, we can make a determination, well, which task can we do first? Which task can't be done until others are done before that? And we construct the network. And the network gives us the critical path, and it gives us the duration of the project. It also tells us what our slack is, and it gives us that kind of visibility and sense as a project manager, if we have to move things around later because of resource issues of personnel or staff or materials, we have the ability and understanding of the network of the project, the critical path. We have an idea that if we move something, what the impact of that'll be. And then once we have the network, we want to put a timeline on that because we want to see how everything stacks up and how about holidays and weekends and when work will be done. And we put it on a Gantt chart, which gives us a time base, and all those tasks from the network goes onto that Gantt chart. And now we have the constructed schedule, and we can put reload our resources from our task description sheets, and we can put the resources in there, and we can see whether or not we've over allocated resources. In other words, maybe we've got only 3 designers, and the way our tasks line up, we need 5. So that means we either got to get a couple of more designers from inside or outside, or maybe we got to move a task around. And that's when we do our resource leveling. Once we have all that information, we can then take all this basic information and develop our cost estimate. And all during this entire period of time, we're collecting elements that are potential risks, and then we can do our risk management plan and do our risk registers and start identifying and looking at risks and set up the probability and scoping out the impact, and then how do we want to handle the risks, how are we going to stack them up, how are we going to process them, what is the mitigation we're going to use, and then we can go forward and we have our project plan and we can take it forward for approval and authorization to actually establish it as the approved baseline for our project. So this gives us a real good sense and flow of what we are doing as we process through the planning cycle for a project. We also have a possibility here by using different types of graph to portray pictures, communicate information. It's interesting, on the left we have a WBS scope and structure, then we have a dependency matrix, and then we have a prioritization scenario, and that's not something that's commonly used, but basically there's various elements or various aspects of the project that have certain priorities, or resources that have certain priorities, or that we can get them or we can't get them. And so we plot that out. That gives us information. From that information, from the WBS, the matrix, and the prioritization, then we can put together maybe a strategic high-level project schedule, then come in with the detailed tactical schedule, and then maybe we have some projects or sub-projects that'll flow out from that. And by a diagram of this nature, not identical to this, but what's appropriate for the project or the complexity of the project that you're managing, demonstrating, diagramming out how you're using various charts and schedules really communicates a lot of information to the observer, to the person in the audience that you're communicating to. We also can take a look at various cost account level schedules, where we're looking at different schedules and we collect the various tasks by the cost account, establishing requirements or release drawing. In other words, each one of them is a conglomerate of many tasks, and what we're just communicating here is various milestones at different levels, and we're recording the budgeted cost of work scheduled over a monthly period, and we can use our cost accounts as a high-level schedule that gives us some idea of where the focus is during those particular period of time, where the weight is, the mass center of the project is, where is the most money being spent. And these type of schedules are helpful in providing that kind of visibility. Additionally, considering that we have a WBS and work packages and then trying to construct a network, what we can see is that by using the various WBS identification numbers, we can then communicate that, and we start to lay out our network, and we can see that, okay, now for the production cost account, we have 2 places or 2 major tasks where that production cost account develops into in our network. And then we have our test system account. We can see where that is in that network. And then we look at our software cost account, and we can see the elements that portray that in our network. So by having a relationship between our WBS and our network, it really gives us some visibility on how our cost accounts come together. In projects, quite often a lot of people use the stoplight charts. The stoplight charts are not quantitative in the sense that they're used for analysis or for the project manager. Primarily, stoplight charts are used by the project office, the project manager, to communicate performance and status to stakeholders, to the customer, to management, to others, to outside interested people. And there's many different forms of stoplight charts, and Here is another one a little bit more complex, but in this one we not only have like a stoplight chart, but also we have some milestones listed on the schedule by month. And then on the right side, we have it listed very cost information, budget amounts, cost to date, remaining funds. At the bottom, then we have a column chart showing cost as it is incurred on a cumulative basis across the various months of the project. In the lower right-hand corner, we have a legend, and every chart should have a legend. People should not have to guess what a symbol means. Every chart, every figure needs to have a form of a legend so that they can understand what they're seeing. This is information graphics. The concept here was in a text by Charles Minard. He went back and he looked at different types of graphics, and they communicate incredible information. Here in this graphic, this was put together about the Russian campaign from 1812 to 1813. It shows the width of the line, shows the march to Russia, and the width shows the number of people in the army, the size of the army. And it shows that how far they got when a portion broke off and was no longer going to go to Moscow, but rather they were going to turn back and they weren't going to be a part of it. And you can see that as they marched to Moscow, the size of the army got smaller and smaller because of defections, desertion, too cold, disease, freezing, sickness. And you can see that the size of the army that got to Moscow was just a mere small portion of what had started out at the beginning of the march. In the black is their return from Moscow, and you can see again the loss of the army as they return, and you can see the origin, how small the number of people were. They came back with about 20,000 people, got back 422,000 left. And this gives you an example of showing by a graphic that really communicates information. And I encourage you can do some research on Minard. There are a number of different graphics that he has pulled together that can give you some incredible ideas of how to present information about your project. On a more practical sense, from a project's point of view, this is a Microsoft project schedule of a project that I did a number of years ago. What I'm showing on information, the top section is the second level of the WBS, all the summary tasks at the second level of the WBS. I picked out 1.7, and there's the topic of it. And then in the bottom graphic, I've expanded that particular summary task to identify all of the tasks which were at the third level of the WBS. At that point, you can see the detail of all the individual projects, and also you'll see some red items there. These are milestone commitments that the customer had to deliver. They had to provide us certain deliveries of hardware at certain times, and they were on that chart also. And so you can see that the kind of big picture you get by looking at the summary level, and then for the project team, the project manager and analysts, the kind of detail you have down by expanding that out down at the third level in the project schedule. When we take a look at resource over allocation, a good way to do it is project, and then you highlight all the tasks, and if you have your staff listed in there. This is a very simple project schedule that I put together strictly to demonstrate resource over allocation with Microsoft Project. And there's really only two resources showing up in the resource usage graph at the bottom half. It's the project manager and the project engineer. And the project engineer is in red because project engineer is over allocated, and we can look out on a chart and we can find the red, and we can see that in the week of 12/30 and 1/6, that's red. The summary level is red. The project engineer is over allocated during that period. And if you look down and take a look at the actual tasks the project engineer is on, you can see that the project engineer's got 4 tasks, 16 hours, 2 that are 24. Those 2 alone are 48 hours. And then another 24, we got 72 hours. That project engineer is over allocated by 80-90%. And then in the following week, the project engineer is allocated 56 hours. So basically in 5 days, the schedule says that the project engineers will work 7 days. So by using these kind of charts, we can communicate communicate a lot of information. And this is really helpful. And this is the kind of chart you use when you're going through your project to look at seeing if your resources are over allocated and how many resources you're actually using on your project team. This is the same chart, but now we've condensed it a little bit in the sense that we've provided in there another resource, the project administrator. Again, this is just for illustration. This was not an actual project. And you can see that we have a project administrator out there in that 12/30 week that actually is over allocated from the amount of time. They're supposed to be half time. And you can see 20 hours, 20 hours, 20 hours. In the period of time they were only supposed to be half time. They're over allocated. So this is a good way of showing that. This is that same project you saw with the project graph where I expanded the one summary task. This is the hours by month, which are columns, and you look to that scale is to the left. The line is the cumulative hours planned, and that scale is to the right. And this project had a total of almost 50,700 hours, resource hours in it. You can see how much it started out in April. Was a 20-month project. It was almost 1,400 hours the first month, 2,100 the second month, 2,600 the third. And it's interesting because to understand the scale that we're talking, a rule of thumb, one FTE or full-time equivalent in a year has 2,000 hours. So if we're going from one month to another month and we're actually increasing our staffing by 700 hours, resource hours, and there's only 160 hours in a month in the planning month, that says that we have got a lot of people coming on board. Or look at the difference between September and October. September is 2,300 and in October is 4,100. So that's almost it's in 1 month, we're almost moving 2,000 hours. So that means we're putting on almost 12 people in 1 month. Those are very serious changes in staffing in a project when you consider that you got to assimilate them, the people, you got to have work for them, you got to be ready for them, and they got to be able to do work. So when you're looking at your staffing, and if you look at the smoothness of the curve, and I'm talking about not the cumulative curve, but I'm looking at the smoothness of the month-to-month transitions, you can see where there'll be difficulties assimilating or bringing people in, or how fast you've got to relieve them when they're no longer required. For instance, you got October at 4,100, you got November here at 3,900, and then we drop down to 2,700. So we go from 39 to 27. That's 1,200 hours. That's over a half a year. That's over 6 people. How fast do we get them off the job? If we don't get them off the job fast, on schedule, that's going to cost a lot of money. And so these are the kind of charts that can be used when you really want to get a sense of how well your staffing is going, how smooth it is, and how big a problem you might have either staffing up or staffing down, depending on what your project requires. In this particular case now, we have actuals plotted on that same, and these two are real projects, and we have actual hours plotted here, and the red represents the actuals, the blue represents the plan. And you can see that in the first month, we overstaffed or over-applied. We had about 100 hours extra. But then in the second month, continue staffing up, and we didn't hardly staff up at all. In the third month, we actually fell off. And then in the fourth month, we started to catch up. In the fifth month, we overshot. You can see the results of the efforts of the project office to try and recover from the loss of staffing. And it is very, very evident when you look at it in this kind of comparison if you want to evaluate your staffing resources. Now, if you look at the blue line, the cumulative line for the plan, and you look at the red, which is the actual cumulative line, you can see that it doesn't look like there's a big difference between them. And as we move on through those third and fourth months, you can see they're starting to come together or starting to convert. But the truth is, it's a lot uglier than that, and you can actually see that when you compare it month by month by month. These kind of charts are very, very helpful. I use these in the project at all times. Now this one is an interesting project schedule, because what this demonstrates is when we talk about earned value and we talk about what method are we going to use to measure performance or measure how much work got done. This particular scale here actually is using that 50-50 work package. In other words, when we start the task, we're going to color in the starting milestone as black, and then we get 50% complete at that point, and then we don't get the other 50% until we finish it. So those first two tasks are completed. They're started and completed. The next task, and the double line going down the middle there, is what we call our status line, or that's the day or the time when we take status on this schedule. So that was the day we struck a line there and we measured where we were on the tasks. And you can see that this one that had 14 on it was already complete. So it was completed almost 3/4 of a month early, and it's completed and we take full credit for it. We also can look at the next one, which was supposed to start 2 months ago. It did. We started it. We took 50% complete, but it's not supposed to start for about a month, be over to a month and a quarter. But we see we really don't know where we are on that one. All we know is it isn't due yet. So this is why 50/50 is not really a very good way of doing it, but it is one way that it can be done. And I would think on short projects, short tasks, 50/50 work packages has the least impact, or it's the least get out of control. Now we look at the next one, which is 10. It started. We don't know where it's at, but it's only been working 3 weeks and it's got about another 7 weeks to go. The following task underneath it, the one that has the 12 on it, that was supposed to start 2 weeks ago and it hasn't started yet. So we know it hasn't started. It's late by 2 weeks and it has no percent complete. This is a real problem. We're behind on that one. We also look at the next one, which isn't supposed to start until almost the end of the next month. And it's already started and got 50% complete. And so it must have started very early or started early. Now, will that early start there offset the one that hasn't started yet? You don't know. That's why this kind of chart presents certain information, but it really does not help you do analysis or really understand where you are on the project. And depending on the criticality of these tasks and the project, you could really be unable to report the overall project status in a quantitative and an effective manner to your customer and to your management and to even the project team. It'd be very hard to do that. I have never used this technique of measuring performance on a schedule. I actually would not, because it would drive me nuts, to be very honest with you. That's what I wanted to share with you regarding looking at some graphic ways of communicating information and knowledge. I hope you've gotten something out of this and gotten some ideas. Please use these for your consideration and to stimulate ideas of how you can demonstrate things. You take care and have a great day, and thank you very much.